Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. This is the podcast that teaches compassionate communication, provides perspective, and inspires resilience. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and I am a professional speaker and author, a compassion consultant, and an adjunct professor at University of Notre Dame, teaching pre-meds compassion science. My guest today is Lisa Terry. Lisa, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm honored to be here.
Lisa, I like you because having you on the show because you're like me. Even though I run a healthcare podcast, I'm not clinical, and so you have some expertise though, like I do, that's alongside healthcare, but not actually a clinical background. So can you give us a little bit of an idea of how you come into this ecosystem of healthcare?
Absolutely. When I graduated from college, I ended up going into the police department in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I met my husband. When we decided to uh, have a family, one of the things we were looking for was that 9 to 5 job that I could probably move into. And it just so happened that Wake Med was advertising for a security director. I had, I'd been a police officer for maybe 5 years, and I pretty much thought that I knew everything about everything. So I applied for the job, and I actually was hired. And I realized as soon as I got there, I was way, way out of my depth. This was in 1987. So it was a large trauma center and a system there in the, mid to eastern part of North Carolina. So it was amazing, kind of an uphill battle. Worked there for 22 years. And during that time, not only did I have uh, the hospital security, hospital police and safety, emergency management, but I also kind of inherited several other support departments, food and nutrition, data processing, print and mail, transportation, some of those things. So I got to really see how a hospital works and learned so much from the clinical folks as well. So I've got a little more than 30 years kind of in that arena at Wake Med and UNC at Chapel Hill, and then also Eastern Virginia Medical School. I built a department there similar.
You've done a lot. You've done a lot. When you went from street policing to working in the hospital, you said you were overwhelmed and found new depths. What kind of things were surprising to you? What were the revelations that you came across when you started working in healthcare?
So, I always kind of think about that. I'll tell you just a little story. Growing up, I was a child of the 1960s, black and white television, and my goal in life was to be Superman. I mean, that was my go-to show, and didn't care that he was fictional or a man. I was going to be Superman. So even during my undergrad, I joined the Army Reserves. I spent, most of my undergrad years doing that, and then kind of got into the police role, and kind of, I guess, maybe subconsciously searching for that way to be Superman. And it was not until I really started working in that level 1 trauma center that I had this epiphany that Superman was actually Clark Kent 90% of the time. This very mild mannered professional reporter who, did his job. And when violence happened, he would go into the booth, change into his Superman persona, and then go out and handle it. But then when it was finished, he went back into the booth and changed back into his Clark Kent persona. He didn't take any credit. He just put his head down. And after I got when I had this, big culture change in the hospital, I realized that hospital security, they're actually Superman every single day. They go in, they keep their head down. When things go awry, they handle the situation, but the expectation is they go back into the booth and put back on that care persona and keep doing their job. And I mean, it took me a minute, but I really, I felt very blessed that I'd finally arrived. I'd finally found Superman and all these officers that I worked with.
That's a great story. That's a great story. And and like you said though, 90% of the time the job doesn't have to be bashing heads, right?
Exactly, exactly,
So
exactly.
what were some of the other surprising things that you found?
Wow. That I think at that time there was this culture that um, everyone had to kind of do their job. It didn't matter whether they were injured or not injured. It was you get in there and you handle the situation, and sometimes all the violence that I recall, especially early on, was really it was not intentional. It was as a result from the patient side of things. It was as a result of their situation, whether it was a brain injury, whether it was a substance on board, things of that nature. And I really had to realize that we were there to take care of them, and they didn't plan that morning to come into that emergency room. We were there to really greet them and take care of them. So it was again a culture change that not only did I have to bring to the table, but I had to model that for those individuals working with me, and to the clinical staff as well. They really were used to being able to call in kind of like bouncers, and that's not what we wanted to be.
Tell me the finer details of that. How did you not want to be like bouncers for the nursing staff or the hospital staff?
So there's so many things. I can tell you that just seeing the individuals that came in, you had empathy just as a human being to human being. You really started to look beyond. We were a level one trauma center, and we also had clinics because we really cared for the individuals that were really not able to get care anywhere else. We were the safety net hospital for that area. And you really got to be up close and personal. You were no longer, being called to enforce a law. You were there to take care of individuals, and sometimes they didn't really know how they needed to be taken care of. So it was a process, I guess, that we all went through, and just I mean, I feel blessed to have gone through it. But it was, unfortunately, I think a lot of hospitals end up bringing in uh, former police officers and corrections, and maybe do not take them through that process um, of learning how to be a part of the care team. And it's a huge process. It's not something that you do alone. The clinicians have to accept you and bring you in, and then you have to do the same thing. It's a synergy, if you will, that has to take place. Um, you know, uh, there's so many. I can tell you times that so many times that I was taught something. We were in the process once of conducting interviews for a promotion in the hospital, and it was probably for a security supervisor. And we usually had a board, and one of the questions that I always ask is, tell me about a time that you either experienced wonderful customer service or you were able to give wonderful customer service. And I remember this officer started telling the story, and we were taken aback. I was definitely taken aback as he started to tell it. But he said, well, the time that he got the best customer service was when he was asked to respond to the morgue to release a body, but also to allow this individual's mother to see her son. And he went down, uh, and that was not unusual that we would go into to the morgue to ensure that that the security of all of those patients from the time they're admitted until they're finally discharged takes place. So he said he was down there and letting the mother kind of see her son. Her son was extremely obese, and he said that during that time the mother started, she cried, but she started telling him about her son and how he had been ridiculed and bullied, uh, sometimes about his weight, sometimes he was just a little different. And she said, but what he ended up doing was he joined the band, and he started to really want to take care of all the other students and all the kids that had been bullied. And she said, I'm so proud that, he took something so bad and made it so good. And anyway, this officer is telling us this story, and I'm kind of wondering when he's going to get to the point. And he said that was customer service, because every single time that I go to the morgue now, I see a person. I no longer see a body. And it blew us away. Needless to say, because of a lot of other things, but he was promoted. But I learned that every day there's someone teaching us something.
That's a great story. That's a great story. A lot of patients, and I'm sure you've been a patient at some point too. You feel a little bit like a cog in a wheel or a number, right?
Yes,
Not an actual person. And so for your officer to still have those same humanity feelings, even though the patient was deceased,
yes.
that that says something. That says something about the culture of the security department too, for that
It
matter.
really, I mean, he had a huge impact with just that little, that small group of us on that board. I guarantee you, every one of us today, and that's probably been 20 years ago that occurred, that we all still have that story top of mind.
Wow. Wow. So speaking of stories kind of like this, at the beginning of the semester with my pre-meds, I always, their first reflection paper, their first assignment of the semester is to just write a real quick 2-page paper about a time that someone was there for them or a time that they were there for another person, really highlighting that compassionate presence during someone's struggle. When I pose that question to you, whether it's professionally with a story from security or personally, what comes to mind when I ask you for a time that someone was there for you or that you were there for another?
Wow, so many people have been there for me. Um, I can tell you, this is probably 30 years ago, but it was on a Christmas morning. My husband and my 2-year-old son and I, we were hit. We were T-boned
Mm.
en route going to the grandmother's house, and pretty serious car accident. Thank goodness I was the only person seriously injured, and immediately, taken to the hospital where I worked, to the trauma center, and I had emergency surgery. So again, I'd been at the hospital probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years at that point. I knew I had certain individuals that I worked with, and I knew certain individuals kind of just, I was acquainted because we were both leaders. We were, either directors or managers. But anyway, the next morning after the surgery, I was in ICU, pretty banged up, and oxygen and arm and everything kind of, uh, not mobile. And this individual walked in, uh, one of the leaders. He was actually a manager of patient transport, um, and walked over to the bed and put his hand on my head, and he kissed my head, and he said, "Lisa, I love you." And of course, I couldn't
Mhm.
answer. I get choked up now
Mhm.
when I'm thinking about it, but I couldn't answer him. But it was like, phew, I felt power. And
Mhm.
then I would say, and I don't know time exactly, but an hour or two later, another individual, another acquaintance. We were not super, close friends or anything, but he actually worked in pathology, and pathology, as you may know, works with, conducting the autopsies, and he managed that area. Um, his name was Tom, and Tom came in, he walked over, and I had one hand that was not, in a cast, and he grabbed my hand, very gently, and he squeezed it, and he said, "I just wanted to tell you, Lisa, I love you." And I can't even explain what that did for me. I mean, I was in there totally alone. Um, and the power that came from those two individuals, I can still feel it today. It made me know I was going to survive. Um, and they meant it. These two guys, I'm sure they didn't plan this. They probably knew each other, but they were not friends. Um, and they meant it from the bottom of their hearts, and I felt it. So yeah, I get choked up when I talk about it, but it was really it was very powerful.
My co-instructor at ND says you can feel it when people love you. You can feel it when people love you, and what you just shared there is a perfect example of that.
It's very healing. I can tell you. I firmly believe that. Very healing.
And speaking of healing, do you have any damage from that still plagues you? It sounds like a pretty
I
terrible
do.
wreck.
My right arm is it's kind of a, it's bent. It'll never be straight, and of course just numbness. But I have it. I have my arm, so I can't really complain. Um, but my son was had very little injuries, and even my husband had very minor injuries, and I know you can probably attest to it. We flipped 5 times. I don't know how we weren't that we came out alive, but you kind of feel like you've got a duty to do something in life that's meaningful, and
Yeah.
those two guys really made me realize that.
Well, you're doing good stuff with life because from the security of the hospital, you've gone on to found your own consulting company and help other hospitals around the country. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I do. I think I, it's very important to me that we as leaders are ethical and credible. And some of the things that I've learned over the years is that it's hard to look inside your own organization and see, we think everything's clean. It's like your house until you are having company. You think the house is clean. So what I love to do is to go in and I try to really stay on top of everything that's going on, all of the new regulatory compliance and leading practices, and share that and look inside, those rooms that maybe they don't always look inside, and just let them know that there's other things out there that they may want to think about. I'm not someone that likes to find something wrong, but if I see something that could obviously be dangerous, I will immediately let them know that's how I feel. I can stop right then and say we've got to do something, but I really try to give them a template to work through, and I've been fortunate enough over my 30 plus years career to have a lot of people out there that have written or they've conducted studies or research, and I can put my hands on that pretty quickly. So again, I feel that I have, I'm in a unique situation that I can share some of those, and I think any of us that have been doing things for a long time, we have a bit of an obligation to share that where where we had opportunities, where we made mistakes, and then look at some of the great things that other people have accomplished that we never could even thought of.
Boy, you're right. You can look at the great things that you've accomplished. You can look at the things that you've done wrong. I mean, you can learn from all of it. You can learn
Absolutely.
from all of it. And I
Absolutely.
assume that you use some of this same knowledge in. You've written 2 books. Is that correct?
I have.
And both of these actually I plan on getting for my daughter because she works in the ED. So, can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. The first one it's really kind of like a handbook for violence in the emergency department, and really it's bringing together all those things that are leading practice recommendations, and really maybe giving individuals. Sometimes we're not always the expert in our own house, so you may say those things, but if you've got someone else that has researched it and has brought in the data, then you can look at that and realize that you know what, I'm not alone here. Here's something that somebody's written, but they actually have other documentation, evidence-based practice out there that says this is a good thing. And then the second one was really, and I really do plan on following up more with from a leadership standpoint on this, but it's about responding, preparing and responding, mitigating the active assailant in the healthcare environment. And so many things have come out even since I wrote the book. A lot of the I guess the passive weapons detection and even officers wearing body worn cameras, things of that nature that really are that help to mitigate certain situations. But I'm constantly trying to conduct studies that would enhance those books, but really giving you some ideas that perhaps in the healthcare environment, even run, hide, fight, there are issues with, and if you have a daughter who is a clinician, she may feel the same way that, they're taught when they take their oath that they don't leave their patient, they don't run away. And how can they put that together ethically and still stay safe and help to keep others safe?
Do you do anything with the follow up after an incident?
I do, I do, and usually, unfortunately, that's when we all start to be a little more introspective and trying to maybe bring someone in from the outside. I've conducted a lot, as a lot of my colleagues have, uh, security vulnerability assessments after events, and that's when you go in and you really want to make sure that. If it's a large organization, I bring others with me that hopefully reflect the individuals that are being served in that community. So it's not just Lisa Terry, this female, but really looking at whether it's different cultures, different ethnicities, that we're really looking at it from different walks of life, not just uh, regulatory, but what is it that the individuals that we serve have a need for? And I think there's so much information out there that um, I think it behooves us to make sure we're looking through other lenses when we conduct those security vulnerability assessments for a hospital.
So I have a master's in a field called narrative medicine. And what we do in narrative is we try to take the stories of healthcare and to turn those into something that people can learn from. And much like what you're talking about here, it's the it's the idea of assessing a way that things can we can look at things from other angles, and then maybe from those other angles it will give us more information how to better conduct ourselves to get the best outcome.
Absolutely.
And especially in major metropolitan areas, level one trauma centers tend to be in major metropolitan areas, which also tend to be melting pots for different cultures, different races, religion, et cetera, et cetera. That's a It almost makes you a bit of a sociologist to study how to um, how to respond to certain cultures and I guess what would be considered cultural behavior maybe in that environment.
Absolutely, and I think, um, which is one of the reasons that I really love the training, the philosophy with Vistalar, because it's all about uh, making sure that you show respect and treat everyone with dignity. And that's not, we can say that, but it's not easy. There's got, and when you're a leader trying to prepare your staff members, you tell them to do that. But if you do not give them some sort of directive, some, either practice some verbiage where you're not being offensive, and it can be as little as, in the South we're very used to calling individuals ma'am and sir, but that can be offensive if we're not talking to that gender, and we don't always
Correct.
know that. So it's important that we look for those greetings, that universal greeting that, as much as possible, is respectful. And I think but as a leader, it's up to me to really to model that behavior, but also to really teach those individuals, give them the tools so that they can be successful.
What do you think that most hospitals do wrong with security?
Oh, wow.
I'm sure that's a very wide open question, and hopefully it also makes you know that you have a lot of job security. But what are the most common things that hospitals do wrong when it comes to security?
Well, I would think it's never intentional. It is not intentional. I think as humans, all of us are very reactive to situations. And sometimes we react to that wherever the loudest noise is coming from. If it's from the clinicians in the emergency department, then we're going to bring in what the biggest, baddest, whatever it takes to make these individuals feel safe so that we can put a band-aid on that right now. And I think it's a human behavior. And, as a parent, we're guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. I say when I first started out, I would never do this, or this, but in the heat of the moment, sometimes you do whatever can prevent the crying. Okay. You can have that for a few minutes because, you don't want to deal with the long-term situation right then. And I think that's probably what I would think is the worst, because it's human nature. It's what we do. And rather than looking at the big picture and bringing everyone to the table, because we're all a part of the solution. And I think sometimes we talk about patient generated violence as being the violence, and we fail to look at um, the lateral, where the way we treat one another, the way that maybe it can be visitors treating other visitors, or visitors treating staff, and maybe looking at the prevention at its core. And I know that sometimes you feel like you don't have time for that, but I think it's very important that you look at your culture. And it starts with each of us. It starts with the CEO of the hospital. It starts with every leader. We have to model the behavior that we want to see. And I'll give you an example. And this, I didn't even know it at the time, but um, the first COO that I worked for at WakeMed, at this large trauma center and health system, and I worked for this gentleman who he was just amazing. But he was, I remember going up to his office. I worked directly for him, and probably one of the first visits I ever had to have as a young leader, going into the COO's office. It was in this beautiful suite, and I go into the office, and it's floor to ceiling windows, just gorgeous. But he had 5 things on his walls, uh, and they range from framed art to perhaps maybe ceramic, some sort of clay sculptures that he had on shelves with a light shining down. And as I'm waiting to talk to him, I started looking at them, and they were all signed. They all had a different individual's name with them, and they were all the COO's last name, Mr. Vinsel. It was Jane Vinsel, or Michael Vinsel, or whatever the child's name was, and the only art in his entire office was from each of his 5 children. And no matter how bad it was or whatever, he took the time and made sure it was framed. I'm sure hundreds of dollars, framed and put up on the wall. This tiny bit of clay had its own shelf. And the one that was from his 5-year-old, the youngest son, it was very bright colored. It looked, to me, it was very cute. He had it framed, and it was some sort of tribal chief, which was just, it was amazing, this chief. And so I said something. I said, so, because I did ask about it. He told me that each was from his children. I said, so what about this? I said, did your son, he drew this tribal chief and painted it? He said, oh no, that was a self-portrait. And I'm like, okay. but what he did was, and he didn't even know that he was doing it, but that was his personal brand that he had displayed to me. And there was no difference in how he conducted himself out there with every one of us. And it started at his home, which he brought into the office. And he absolutely modeled the behavior that for 35 years I've tried to model. I would see him out running after work, and I'm like, I've got to make sure that I do that. I've got to make sure that I conduct myself with this same ethical behavior, this credible behavior that this individual has modeled for me. So I think that was, I mean, I certainly learned something from how we can be better angels, if you will, you know.
Hmm.
And that was, I think, I was very fortunate to kind of be able to see that and start to model that behavior as well. And hopefully, I've got those individuals that have worked for me over the years, and I'm hoping that it's trickled, down.
I'm sure it has. And I'm often fond of saying leadership is one thing, example is another.
Absolutely.
And if you've got somebody who can do both of those things, lead by example, then you've got a real winner right there.
You really do, and I don't think there's that many out there, and especially those that it's not just at work. I mean, it was that whole persona that really helped me, because sometimes we try to divide our business self or our career self from our personal self, and I think it's so important that we are able to have, to kind of cross that, have some sort of conduit between the two.
This this is something that would be taught in a lot of leadership courses, but but I love that example that you do the things and people you do the right things and people will follow you.
Absolutely.
Um, I think one of my best definitions of leadership is just do the right thing. Do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Sometimes easier than others to do and say versus do, but do the right thing.
So one thing, and again, it's another one of those, it's easier to say it than to do it. You've really got to push yourself out of your comfort zone, but not to just be a bystander either.
Mm.
And I can't remember exactly how it goes, but Albert Einstein talked about that the world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are doing evil, but because of the people who do nothing about it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You know, leaders should be the first ones.
Mm-hmm.
All of us should be the ones that step out on that plank and do it. But and I think
Yeah,
that models behavior for everyone else to kind of follow.
absolutely. Yeah, I think of that flight that just had trouble coming out of Portland, Oregon on an Alaska flight with the
Yes,
window flying out and such like that, and the examples of leadership that were shown from passenger to passenger of just keeping people calm and keeping them from freaking out when there's a giant hole in the plane, which you couldn't keep me, the best leader in the world couldn't keep me from freaking out when there's a hole in the plane. But it doesn't have to be done in a formal position that has a C in front of the name, right in front of the title.
absolutely.
It's person to person too.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all responsible for, and this is one of my friends, Jill Weisensell, has written a book, and one of the things that she really talks about is we're all responsible for the energy that we bring into the room, and it's either going to get better because we're in it or not. It's either people are going to feel emotionally safer or not. They're going to feel physically safer or not. And I think that has, as you said, that's not attached to a leader. That's attached to every single person.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, we could talk all day about leadership, but in the time we have left, could I throw some kind of random get to know you questions your way?
Absolutely.
All right. So So you talked about growing up and watching Superman on the TV and such like that. Let's take it a little bit later in life when you're a teenager, you're hanging out with your friends, high school, on a after school, after practice, after work, or on the weekends, you're hanging out with your friends. What are you all listening to on the radio? What are you listening to on the CD player?
Oh, wow. So, I was a teenager in, 74 through 78 in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were at the time, I lived in Western North Carolina. So most of what I listened to was rock. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm the youngest of six. So those that went before me, and, I had one brother in Vietnam. So, the Doors, all those things were popular. And because I was kind of there as a young sister, I loved it. I loved the Stones. I felt like they were so far above their time. I mean, I think people may not even understand them yet. But the Beatles, the Stones, and of course some, Leonard Skinner, all of those things. And we didn't really listen. And I'm sure there was a lot. Probably my older siblings felt more of those political messages, or those, kind of, because that the music then definitely still had, there was reasons for it, why it was coming out. So that's kind of, I guess that's what we listened to. And then by the time that we were in college, there was uh, the Commodores, and of course Michael Jackson. I loved Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I always just love to find out people's opinions on music. Ever since my teenage years, I've been a huge, huge, huge music fan, and I give credit to Bob Dylan, Bruce
Oh
Springsteen,
yeah,
Bob Marley,
absolutely.
etc., all for writing lyrics that I applied to my life to get me through some of the biggest struggles I've ever known.
Oh yeah.
And so, Stones too, for that matter.
Well, and Neil
Stones too, for
Young. I mean,
that
we
matter.
can't not mention
Mm-hmm.
Neil Young. So yeah,
Yep.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yep. I, I know that when I was a kid, a lot of, I don't know, probably just my dad, but give me a little trouble about, all these music CDs, da 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 da. It's like, yeah, but those ended up saving my life a little bit later and taught me some of the best lessons that I've ever learned too.
Well, and my son actually taught me how to listen to rap and hip hop. That was not a
Hmm.
genre that I was familiar with, and it didn't initially resonate with me. But he really gave me a lesson,
Hmm.
and helped me to appreciate other genres.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we can learn a lot from our our youngsters for sure.
Absolutely,
For
absolutely.
sure. Do you have a favorite book or a book that you most frequently recommend for people?
Wow, I've got a lot, but I will tell you, of late, I think. Let me just think for a second. The one that I think, Left of Bang is probably my favorite. And I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with that. It was actually written by a couple of retired Marines. And Left of Bang is a military kind of combat uh, plan, if you will. But they brought the book down to kind of any civilian, it's just kind of life. And Bang, and I'll just kind of be quick, Bang is basically any bad thing that could happen. For instance, in a hospital, let's say a patient elopes, gets out of the hospital, and maybe even gets injured. That's the bang. So left of bang is every single thing that you can do proactively to prevent something like that from occurring. And you rarely want to be right of bang, but all of us end up right of bang. I mean, there's things that happen, and it's after the fact. We go back and we look at it. And I think they really talk about how do you get back left of bang after an event. Excuse me, but I think the really being proactive is, they, for them it was very tactical, but to really apply it to every walk of life. I love it. I love living left of bang. I want to push leaders to lead left of bang, to always be looking at all the things you can do to prevent a situation. And then maybe looking at a situation and looking at how do we get back right, or from right back to left.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I'm gonna have to get this book, Left of Bang.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Very good. What are you reading right now?
Oh, wow. I I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks. So I'm not reading. I'm actually traveling. So um, it's hard for me to even give you a name. But I listen. I listen to podcasts, yours,
Mhm.
and I listen to other audiobooks, whatever that I can find.
Mhm.
Um, it depends on
I'm
what's going on.
always yeah, I'm always reading and listening to podcasts, and anybody who can turn me on to something new. That's why I ask these
Oh,
questions
I
for
will,
my
and I
own
will. I'll have to do that.
enrichment.
I kind of, based on what I'm doing, if it's driving somewhere, I prefer to listen to a podcast. If I'm on a flight, I may listen to an audiobook that's fiction. Um,
Hmm.
so something to kind of move me a little bit, and to
Hmm.
kind of take me away from work, if you will, to kind of make my brain stop working for just a few, couple hours.
Boy, if you're in an airline flight for a few hours, you need something to take your mind away from
You really do.
from what your current situation is. And so, Lisa, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. My last question for you is if you could take all of your experiences and all of your knowledge, and if you could distill it down to where it could be on a billboard, but this billboard is the world's largest billboard on the world's tallest mountain. What's the message that you would want to broadcast to humanity?
Wow. I'm a fairly emotional person. And I think I was brought up, my parents were working class folks, six kids, and my dad really instilled in us, and I don't know exactly how to say it, but we are only as great as the least among us. And my
Hmm.
dad was always, probably he never got into a bind with, but he always picked up hitchhikers. He always, fought for the underdog, either literally or figuratively. And it certainly was instilled in probably all six of us.
Fight for the underdog.
Yeah,
I
and
think that
we're only as great as the least among us.
it's the least among us.
Yes,
Yeah, that's a great thing to keep in mind, right? That'll keep you on the straight and narrow to remember those who are on a lower rung or a lower social economic status. Something good to keep in mind. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing stories and your knowledge. And if people want to know more about you and the work that you offer to hospitals, where can they go find that?
um, well, actually, they could just email me. I'm working some with Vistalar. So Vistalar is Vistelar. And we do training that is for prevention, specifically healthcare, uh, for workplace violence prevention, uh, prevention, de-escalation, and conflict management. So, going
Mhm.
to the Vistalar website, and then you can, easily just send me an email if there's other things from a consulting standpoint. It's just Lisa Terry 82 at gmail.com. And I'd love
Excellent.
to have anybody reach out with any uh, comments, questions, concerns. If they have any needs, I'd be very happy to either help them or direct them to someone who can.
Awesome. Awesome. Lisa, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It is an absolute privilege to get to speak with you, sir.
Well, it's been a privilege to talk to you too. Thank you. And listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Compassion and Courage. This is the podcast that teaches compassionate communication, provides perspective, and inspires resilience. Thank you to everyone who continues to like and review and share and subscribe to Compassion and Courage. Thank you for helping us get the word out, and we will see you on the very next episode.